All right, today we're going to be talking about adding rational numbers. So last week we discussed what rational numbers were. So now we're going to look at adding, subtracting them today. So we'll start with addition. The first note that we're going to make for negative fractions is that negative fractions can be written in three different ways. The first way you can see a negative fraction written is with the negative sign in front of the fraction. We would read this as negative 2/3. This is equivalent to if the negative was with our numerator as such, negative 2/3. Or we can have the negative with the number below. All three of these are equivalent to one another. They're all representing negative 2/3. What we cannot do is we cannot put the negative on the numerator and on the denominator. This changes the value of the fraction. Note that now we have a negative divided by a negative, which in turn would make this a positive value. It would make it a positive 2/3. And because we wanted to represent negative 2/3, that is not an option. So to recap, our negative can be in front of our fraction, or it can be with the numerator, or it can be with the denominator, just not both. So let's go ahead and add two rational numbers. So we have negative 8/3 plus 5/6. Remember that when we add fractions, we need a common denominator. In this case, we do not have a common denominator, but the lowest common denominator is 6, because 3 and 6 both go into it. So what we have to do first is we need to change this denominator to a 6 while keeping an equivalent fraction. To do so, we would multiply the denominator by 2 as well as the numerator by 2. That is going to give us negative 16 divided by 6, or negative 16/6. Here, let me rewrite that. Plus 5/6. Now, as we noted before, the negative sign can go with the numerator or the denominator. I like to do things consistently, and personally, I always put the negative sign with the numerator. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to make this negative 16/6 plus 5/6. The reason I always use the numerator is because if I made the denominator negative, now I have a negative 6 and a 6, and I know I need the same thing. So I like the habit of always using the numerator with my negative sign. Now that I have common denominator of 6, I go ahead and I add the numerators, and I follow my integer rules. Negative 16 plus 5 is going to equal negative 11. So my answer is negative 11/6. I can keep this as an improper fraction or change it to a mixed number. 6 goes into 11 how many times? Once, with 5 left over. And because this was a negative improper fraction, I need to make sure my mixed number is negative as well. So negative 5/6 would be my final. Let's go ahead and do another example. Negative 2/3 plus negative 5/4. Right off the bat, I'm going to take my negatives and I'm going to put them on my numerator. I need a common denominator. In this case, it's going to be 12, and both fractions need to be changed. So we're going to multiply this by 4, and that numerator by 4, and here we need to multiply by 3. This will give me negative 8/12, and I'm adding negative 15/12. Common denominator. Go ahead and add the numerators. Negative 8 plus negative 15, following my integer rules, gives me negative 23, which I can then I could keep it. I'm okay with improper fractions, or we change it to the mixed number. 12 goes in once with 11 left over. Negative improper, so I need a negative mixed number. Here I'm adding a negative mixed number and an improper fraction. We have to be really careful when we change mixed numbers into improper fractions that are negative. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the negative out front, and we're going to treat this improper, or this mixed number, as if it were positive. So we're going to do 4 times 2, which is 8, 8 plus 3. That gives us 11 fourths plus 13 fourths. Sometimes students will take the denominator here and do 4 times negative 2 and get negative 8 and try to add 3 to negative 8. We want to avoid that. We want to treat it as if it's just a positive mixed number and then account for our negative at the end. All right, I'm going to take my negative sign and put it with my numerator. So now I have a negative 11 plus 13, which gives me 2, which I can simplify to 1/2. 2 fourths is equal to 1/2. We can also add positive and negative rational numbers in the form of decimals. Again, we're following our integer rules. So negative 4.05 plus 7.62. Which value has the greater absolute value? 7.62. So that's going to be the resulting sign for our value, or our answer, our sum, excuse me. It's going to be positive. Now, how many more positives do I have than negatives? Well, we're going to have to do a little subtraction. So we're going to do 7.62 subtract 4.05. We're just finding out how many more positives we have than negatives. Remember, when we subtract decimals, we align the decimals and we subtract. 12 is 7, 5 minus 0 is 5, 7 minus 4 is 3. So my answer is going to be a positive 3.57. And that's how we would add rational numbers. If we subtract rational numbers, we're going to follow the same rules for integers and fractions that we have. So now we'll take a look at subtracting rational numbers. 2/5 take away negative 1/5. Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to add the opposite. So the opposite of negative 1/5 is positive 1/5. Now I'm resulted with 2/5 plus 1/5, and that leaves me with 3/5. So I followed my integer rules for dealing with the subtracting a negative, and then I followed my fraction rules. Negative 4 1/7 minus 6/7. Again, changing a negative mixed number, I'm going to do 7 times a positive 4, which is 28, plus 1. So it leaves me with 29 sevenths. And I count for that negative. I'm going to put it right there on my numerator. Take away 6/7. I have a common denominator, so I am good to go. So 7 is my denominator, and I do negative 29, take away 6. I'm going to change this to add a negative 6 just to help me out. That's going to give me negative 29 plus negative 6, which leaves me with negative 35. This simplifies negative 35 divided by 7 to negative 5. And my last one, 12.8 minus 21.6. First step I'm going to do, because I'm subtracting something that's larger, I'm going to make it add the opposite. I have more negatives than positives, so my result will be negative. And I'm going to subtract them to find out how many more negatives I have. Negative 8.8. And that is adding and subtracting rational numbers.